So I thought I'd just run through how things have worked out for me, what I've sort of learned along the way, and hopefully if people who are out there starting out in their careers hopefully can get something out of it. So along the bottom, I've just got a timeline of my academic and professional history. It's what I put in my CV, and it's a nice thing to have. It gives a nice graphic for whoever's reviewing your CV. They don't have to trawl through paragraphs of text. They can just see where you've been and when you were there and who you worked for. And yeah, let's jump right into it. I'm sorry it's jumping like this. I don't know what's going on. Right, so I was a pretty average high school student. I got good enough marks to get my first year at university free, as long as I took a BSc. And at the time, I wasn't actually sure what to study, but my cousin worked for De Beers, and he showed me some videos of them prospecting in the jungles of Gabon and driving dune buggies in Mauritania. And I thought that looks much more exciting than a BCom. And so I started with geology, went through the motions, and some of you, if you remember in the early 2000s, I don't know if it's still like that, but in third year, the professors and researchers would come and put forward projects that they have for anybody who's doing honors. And I would say the bulk of our class was actually, we're lucky enough to be bursary students, and a lot of them already had platinum or gold or coal, iron, and there were even a few diamond guys. They already had projects lined up, and I didn't have anything. And Prof. Judith Kinnaird said, "Oh, I've got a project in Namibia, and to sweeten the deal, there's actually a little field trip to Namibia." And so that sold me. And I did my honors project on some samples from the Rossing mine. And just for everybody, Namibia is a major uranium producer globally. I think it's ranked number 3 at the moment, and almost all of that's actually coming from one mine at the moment. We'll get to that. But for the bulk of its existence as a producer, almost all uraniums come from the Rossing mine. Seems to be jumping forward 3 every time I go. So after my honors thesis was done, Judith said, "We'll stay on for a master's. We've got a bit of sponsorship money for you." And so I did. And in 2012, I submitted the master's, and she said, "Well, let's make it a PhD. It won't take much." That's famous last words. It was grueling. And during my master's, it was going slow, and Judith said, "Well, there's some contract work in Botswana." And so I joined a group called Impact Minerals, who actually poached me from CCIC. Sorry, John. And a year later, Extract Resources, who had a big project in Namibia, contacted me, and I left Impact Minerals and went to them. 2 years later, a Chinese power company bought the Extracts project and asked me to stay on. So I stayed on, submitted my PhD while I was working there. 2017 came home to South Africa, settled down and, start a family, etc. And I found a job at Mintec in the Mineralogy division. It took me 9 months to find that job, though. It hasn't been easy for geologists in South Africa. And as of February this year, I've been with the Council for Geoscience. And I just, for the young guys out there, maintain your LinkedIn profile. It does work. So postgraduate fieldwork. Namibia is a great place for geology. There's exceptional exposure. It's not quite Mars, but it does feel like another planet. I collected surface samples as well as drill core samples. And we got sponsorship for analysis from 3 exploration companies. And one of them, Extract Resources, were particularly interested in the mineralogy that I was doing on the samples, and we remained in contact. The picture on the left is Professor Roger Gibson and my friend Luke. And in the bottom is Prof. Kinnaird for scale, and that's a nice parasitic fold in some marbles on one of the flanks of these dome structures that we were interested in Namibia. While we were out there, I got my sort of first exposure to the darker side of exploration, you know, where the money comes from. And the picture in the top left is myself and the project manager. And then the guy with the striped shirt and the video camera is an investor from an investment group in Canada. And we were showing him around all the good parts of the deposit to try and drum up interest. And like I say, the scenery is spectacular there. The bottom right is actually the initial extract resources exploration camp. And it's in a valley on the side of a big dome, and along the side of that dome is where all the uranium is, and that's where they were drilling at the time. But in 2009, Extract Resources got hold of Judith and asked if I would do some mineralogy work, and they would pay for it. I guess because it's much cheaper than going to a commercial lab, and then you have the benefit of an academic on hand and a cheap student to do the work. And that really worked out well for me, and I'll get onto that in the slides to come. Anyway, so in 2010, like I said, I went to Botswana and I worked for Impact Minerals. I went to their website the other day, and they've still got my feet on their banner on the front page of their website. So I must have left some kind of impact with them. So it was a junior geologist role. They were drilling and mapping and sampling across eastern Botswana, all the way from Sarowe in the south up to Nata in the north. Nata served as our sort of base to get to the Makgadikgadi, where we did some Aircore drilling. I'll get to that in the next slide. We did mapping and sampling everywhere. Rain, sunshine, didn't matter. We had quite a hard taskmaster. And the main things I took away from that is if you're a junior and you go to one of these exploration projects, you'll be doing just about everything. And it's an excellent place to learn, and you should just be prepared to take in everything that you can. Time is extremely important for these sorts of outfits. Not that it isn't for big companies, but it's very crucial for the small guys. And also your senior geo or the project manager is under immense pressure, and it's going to be transferred to you, and you just have to live with that. And also, if you've got a camp cook and you can show them a few things about what the food you like, it's helpful. Because if you've been drilling all day and you come back to flash boiled meat and you're hungry and tired, it can be an unpleasant stay at camp. As I said, there's a lot of pressure, but it's a lot of fun, steep learning curve, and you get to see a lot of the countryside. So it was my first real experience on a drilling campaign. And, you know, when it rained, my boss would say, get some sample bags, put the electronics in the sample bags. We're going for a walk. And we'd go and map in the rain because we couldn't drill. And another useful bit of advice, which I still use now, is when you're trying to find contacts in chip trays, it's actually a little easier to look at the muck piles on the floor, or even better, the big bulk bags that come off of the cyclones. As soon as the color changes, there's a contact. Also, Botswana can be very cold in the winter. People think it's a hot country, but it's freezing in winter. And you know, you get creative when you're in the camp and there's not much on. We built ourselves a gym, and that helped keep the morale up at the end of the day. Just some pictures. The middle one is the drill rig stuck in the mud at night, the day before we're supposed to start drilling. The next morning, the loader that was supposed to drag the drill out got stuck as well. But eventually we were drilling. And like I said, camp food can be interesting. The top right is a picture of a goat just busy hanging. And we had, we had the entrails for dinner that night, and then slowly worked our way through the rest of the animal in the weeks that came. I had a very serious boss, and he worked us hard and gave a lot of good advice. And it's the guy in the middle with the weird pose who was our country manager. And that's us trying on our new field gear. The tall guy is also, they're both Australians. It was an Australian junior. He's also out from Australia, first time in Africa. And it was quite interesting to work with people who'd never been here before. So what else did I do besides the drilling? They sent me out to go mapping. That's me at some Karoo outcrop, trying to find these lenses of uranium mineralization within the Karoo. On the left is our Monday.com whiteboard. And on the bottom of it, you can see our Gantt chart for drilling. And all the important things that we need to get done. And so old school mapping, we didn't have a budget for a fancy GIS system. So I stapled together A3 tracing paper sheets and put them over aerial photos, and I did ground truthing in the field and then traced contacts. And I think it was about 50 or 60 square kilometers I did that way, and it proved very useful to the company. So don't discount the old ways of doing things. I don't know if you read the email. That is a real email I got from our exploration manager about how this map was going to get back to Australia from Botswana. Okay, so the Makgadikgadi project was also part of Impact's portfolio, and we were basically drilling on the pan in the dry season and hoping that the crust of salt on the top would hold up the vehicles in the drill. And so that's why they chose something called an Aircore drill, and it's a reverse circulation drill mounted on a Land Cruiser. It does need a water supply, so it's a little bit different to a reverse circulation drill in that sense, but it's the same principle with a double tube. And you can get down to about 100 meters. So we were drilling to the basement of the pan. So we were carting water in and out. We set up our own fly camp. We put in our own plumbing system. We got some local guys to build us a water tower. We had power. It was a luxurious camp, if I can put it that way. And everybody got a nickname on site. So Prof was named Prof because he could fix just about anything. We had Stone Cold for Stone Cold Steve Austin because he was strong. Our cook's name was Rambo because our logistics manager said none of the white guys would be able to pronounce his traditional name. And so Rambo was his favorite movie, and so he became Rambo, and so on. So, it was high pressure, but lots of fun. So this is what drilling on the pan looks like. Lots of stuck vehicles. You can see the drill in the top left. It's sitting on a bucky, and those rods can actually be loaded by one person. So it's a two-man operation. It's a very light setup. The bottom center is our water geyser for our camp. And the geologists dug trenches. That's one of the geologists there. We dug trenches and sunk our plumbing system. Top right's the village of Nata. And the rule was if you got your bucky stuck, you also had to pose for a photo with it. And then we were allowed to dig it out. And, drilling on the pan was pretty surreal. And at times you were far enough onto the pan that in all directions you couldn't see anything but the flat pan, which was a little disconcerting if you started feeling your vehicle getting stuck. Anyway, while I was on this drilling program in the pan, Extract Resources, who owned Swakop Uranium in Namibia, were busy drilling their Rossing South project. It was eventually changed to Husab, which maybe some of you are familiar with. And in 2010, they'd completed a definitive feasibility study with recommendations to check the mineralogy of the uranium because it has implications for processing. And it's a world-class deposit, 150 million tons a year. 15 million pounds of yellow cake per year at capacity. And it's really 2 deposits that they're digging with 2 pits. The deepest is going to be 450 meters. And it's right next door to Rossing. And they have other deposits on the license. And I've put in the processing note there because that's really the crux of why I got involved with the project. Certain uranium minerals do not oxidize with a ferric solution, and therefore you can't extract the uranium in the normal conventional acid leach. You have to use an alkali leach, and they wanted to be certain they weren't going to lose too much uranium to the refractory minerals. So I get a call from Extract Resources while I was in Botswana, and this was followed by an email, which I've put up there. It was just quite nostalgic to find these old emails, so I thought I'd put it in. But basically they said they've got work and they'd want to know if I was interested, and I said of course. And another thing for maybe the young geologists, I did feel really pained about it initially, because the guys at Impact were really nice to work with and I'd learned so much from them, and I was sort of jumping ship within a year. But my boss at Impact, the hard taskmaster, said, there's no love lost here, and there's no burnt bridges. You should take the opportunity and don't feel bad. So, you know, if something good comes along, think about it, but it's probably worth taking. Just a brief thing on the Husab deposits. They're deposits buried beneath the Namib cover directly south of the Rossing pit. There's various reasons why Rossing weren't looking there. It's not because they didn't know what they were doing. There's many things at play, including economics. And anyway, Extract Resources went ahead and found these deposits. And just to reiterate what the scale of it, they drilled about 780,000 meters to find the deposit. I've left the blank there after 2015 because that's when I left the company in 2016 and they were still drilling. How they found it, bottom left, you can see the radiometric signature over the mine, which is where my cursor is, and there's nothing. But on the right, you'll see there's a very prominent negative magnetic response from one of the target lithologies. And so the exploration geologists targeted those magnetic anomalies because they knew they were associated with mineralization, because you could see it on surface at the Rossing mine. And they hit mineralization and then just proceeded to find more and more, and it's now a mine. So why me? Why did they contact me to come work on the project? Well, as I mentioned earlier, they were sponsoring some of the mineralogy work that was going into my master's and what would eventually become my PhD. And so I wrote these reports, and from report 1 to report 3 for Extract Resources, there's a lot of improvement, and I'm actually a little bit, how do I say it? I don't like looking at them because they're terrible. But anyway, they thought enough of what I was doing to keep me involved. And so, yeah, I joined the team. Also, for the juniors who might be listening, it's quite difficult to get a visa or a work permit to work in other countries for various reasons. And so I actually worked for a engineering consultancy based in South Africa who'd been awarded the contract for getting the project to feasibility stage. And so they just sent me back and forth to Namibia on sort of 2 or 3 months or 3 or 4 or 6 weeks sort of secondments, so that I was within the visa limitations, but I did not have a permanent or a work permit to stay in Namibia on a year-on-year basis. I was responsible for actually figuring out how to predict where the refractory minerals would be, and that involved sampling a lot of the boreholes. There was something like 500,000 meters of borehole that I could sample, and I had to figure out a system for getting the right samples and the right intervals, and a lot of that was driven by the mine design, the processing schedule, the metallurgical needs, and then of course the geology. And that's where I learned about real deadlines and really tough bosses. There was very little room for error on that, but nonetheless, a very good learning experience. It was really great to be part of such a big project, especially being so young. I got to go to Australia and meet the discovery team and discuss my project with them. And I got to be involved with honors students and their research, as well as I got more data, and that allowed me to convert my MSc into a PhD. That was home away from home while we were there. We had a really nice camp with my own private shower and toilet. And anyway, so back to my activities. DFS stands for Definitive Feasibility Study. Basically, what I did was query the resource model for sampling intervals, went and found those samples in the stores of rejects that we had, and then worked with the metallurgists to set up a testing station, and then input all that data into a geological model. At the same time, to get my working visa, I had to be mentoring junior Namibian geologists, despite being a junior myself. And then while I was there, every other project manager based in Joburg would make me go and do things while I was in Namibia, like collect samples for acid consumption or acid consuming test work for lining of the tailings and lining of the waste rock heaps, or going to visit potential aggregate suppliers at different quarries, and so on. On top of that, I was also working on the Offmine drilling. I had to familiarize myself with these metallurgical charts and just some pictures of the lab rejects we had to dig through to get the samples to do our test work to find the refractory uranium minerals. And eventually, the outcome of all this was to highlight where in the resource model we could expect troublesome ore, and in what sort of volumes they could estimate it by looking at the block model. And they could plan the mining schedule and their stockpiling around that, especially in the early stages of mining. We went through a lot of mineralogy work. We drilled some twin holes to get some fresh samples. These are images of these refractory minerals, namely branorite and betaphyte. And what I also did was try and figure out a chemical proxy that we could use to pinpoint where these refractories are without having to go through expensive QuemScan or automated SEM work. And we found that things like yttrium, by doing microprobe work on the uranium minerals, we found other elements that concentrated in the refractory minerals, such as yttrium. And we found there's a nice correlation between yttrium and uranium in the refractory minerals. And we used that to advise the grade control guys, who would then take a handheld XRF and look for these proxy elements in the production drilling muck piles, and that would give the miners a sort of a 2-week head start on whether or not they had to stockpile as refractory or move straight to the other run of mine stockpiles. So once the project generated enough interest in 2013, it was bought by China General Nuclear, and I was fortunate enough to still be on board. And the new owners said, come along to China and speak to all the geologists on the team in China about what you know about the deposit. And so myself and the mineral resource manager is the guy here on the left, Bertie Rusner. We got to go spend nearly 2 weeks in China, speaking to geologists and geophysicists and the various management teams there. And that was a really great experience. And there's some pictures of us taking the new owners and some of the new geologists and execs out to some of the outcrop on the license areas. I stayed on while they were building the mine. And again, wherever there was a need for some geology input, it seemed to be me, because I had the history on the project from when it was still at feasibility stage. And it was a very impressive place to be. Those big towers in the middle of the leach columns, where the ferric solution and the milled ore are processed. The machines are huge, of course. And then every now and then there would be infill drilling in the pits to fill in the gaps in the resource model. And sometimes at the edge of the pits, we would also be drilling, sometimes for geotechnical purposes, for slope stability of the pit walls, and sometimes just to help define the resource. I was also responsible for exploration on the licenses around the mining license. I got to spend time with visiting groups. These are postgraduates from University of Stellenbosch, and that's Alex Kisters and his PhD student Talene Kruger, talking about the structure. Sorry. The bottom left is a bulk sampling project I was also running. We had to collect about 3,000 samples from 3,000 tons of ore, and we used a conveyor belt that had a sweeping arm to make sure we were making a homogeneous mix of this 3,000 tons. It was a challenging exercise, but lots of very rewarding in the end. And also, I was responsible for reporting our exploration activities to the government, and part of that involved being environmentally compliant. So it's one of our logistics administrators looking at a completely rehabilitated drill pad. So there was a drill standing here at some point. The reason it's so clean is because we were actually within a national park. The good stuff about working in Namibia, it's a really nice place if you like the outdoors. I am a terrible fisherman, but even I could catch fish there. This picture of me with a weird smile is quite special because the old man in the middle there is Paul Allen, who was co-founder of Microsoft. And he kept a fleet of Unimogs in a hangar in Walvis Bay. And from time to time, he would park his yacht at Walvis Bay and go on expeditions with his team through Namibia. And he was an avid musician. And while he played at this bar, drinks were on him, which was quite nice. He said that was his apology for making us listen to his music. Got to go skydiving. That's my wife there. We're very cool before we got in the plane. It was a different story flying up. And also geology in Namibia is pretty spectacular. This is the Husab River. This is the Husab schists outcropping. And just to give you some perspective, that's a friend of mine in the foreground. It's a really spectacular place to be. And that is the Bruntberg alkali complex living up to its name at sunset. Okay, 2017, circumstances sort of changed, and we decided we'd be better off living back in South Africa. Various things drove that decision. And I ended up working at Mintec Mineralogy, and that was a really good place to go. I had some mineralogy background from my own research, but at Mintec is where I really learned about process mineralogy and the role of the different analytical techniques in various metallurgical applications. And we were exposed to projects throughout Southern Africa and internationally. And there you really learn about time management because you're juggling our own state-sponsored research as well as the commercial projects that have very tight deadlines. And you're dealing with many different clients at the same time. And you learn to cooperate with a lot of people from a lot of different divisions within the organization. And yeah, the real highlights for me were getting to grips with all these different analytical techniques and exposure to other commodities. I'd been really stuck in uranium for a long time, and also being involved with the tomography program at Mintec, sorry. It's a joint program with UNISA. So some of the interesting things we did was doing some radiometric mapping of the mine dumps around Joburg. Those ones on the right are the Crown Mines dumps, and they are quite radioactive, but you find most of the radiation is actually around the drain points. So mobile uranium moves towards the drain points and comes through the base of the mine dump. And what they're worried about is that radioactive water making its way into the natural water system around the dumps. I also learned about the various sample preparation techniques and how to handle different commodities. You treat PGM samples much more carefully than you do iron ore samples, and so on. I also got very familiar with working on the SEM, as well as electron probe and XRD. Just some snapshots of what we were involved in the X-ray tomography side. This is a new machine that UNISA and Mintec purchased from Zeiss, and we were busy conducting experiments on PGMs in Platreef drill core, as well as heavy mineral separates from the mineral processing division. These are chromatites and silicates, and we were trying to do volume estimations with the XRT, the tomography, X-ray tomography equipment, as maybe a stand-in for the normal 2D MLA or QEM analysis, because you can look at literally hundreds of thousands of grains in one scan in 3D, whereas in 2D you are a little limited by the size of your polished slab, and then of course you're only looking at one surface when you're using an MLA or a QEM scan. I won't stay on that too long, but that's also a real highlight of my time at Mintec. Okay, since then I've joined the CGS. A really good role came up and I applied for it and they selected me, and I'm involved with the minerals and energy stream at the CGS, and it's really focused on economic prospects, a lot of which are in the Northern Cape and Limpopo, for those of you familiar with what the CGS is doing. I also sit on sort of advisory committees for activities such as drilling, because I've got the background from my time in Namibia, and I'm also involved in mentoring postgraduate projects. So CGS employees who are embarking on a master's or a PhD, I'm involved with getting their proposals in line and helping them with their research. I also review technical reports for various divisions within the CGS. And just in summary, I think it's very good to plan your career, but you should also be prepared to take new opportunities. You're never sure when they might come up. And you know, in my career, it feels like it's a string of good luck. But when I look back, certain decisions have led to things step by step. So it's not entirely luck. You know, if you want to do a postgraduate degree and you've got sponsorship and time, you should. But I also think it's equally valuable to just get into a job if you can find one, and think about a postgraduate later when you've figured out what you're really passionate about. And also be open to working outside of South Africa. There's lots of opportunities in sub-Saharan Africa, and places like the Middle East are opening up as they start thinking about moving away from oil and into normal mineral commodities. I would also advise getting familiar with one of the 3D packages. I don't think it matters which. I'm quite familiar with Geovia. It used to be called Serpac, but things like Leapfrog and Datamine are all, you know, well known. I'd also practice GIS if you can, and also get good at Access and Excel. I've also been advised that you should get some kind of finance qualification, and also learn to write. It saves you a lot of time if you can write a report quickly, and it will save the person reviewing your report a lot of time if you can write efficiently and neatly. And I would say, if you're out looking for work, LinkedIn is an excellent place to make sure your profile is in good shape. Keep busy on it, because people see that you're busy and they see your comments on various topics, and you never know who's going to drop you a message down the line. What's next? I'm still sort of settling in, and I would like to get more finance and project management skills behind me. And yeah, that's it. Sorry, I've rushed it a bit. I was just concerned for time.